Cold open, Coral Sea, May 1942. The sun was setting over the Coral Sea, turning the water into molten copper. It should have been beautiful. Instead, it was a graveyard. Captain Vincent Merrick stood on the deck of the destroyer, watching the oil slick spread across the surface. The oil was all that remained of a B-25 Mitchell bomber. His B-25. His modifications, his design. 6 men were in that plane, 6 men who trusted his engineering. Now they were feeding the sharks. The fuel system had failed. Merrick had redesigned it himself 3 weeks earlier. He'd calculated the flow rates, reinforced the bladders, tested it on the ground. On paper, it was perfect. In the air, at 12,000 feet, it had ruptured. The pilot had radioed in. 3 words. Fuel system failure. Then silence. Then impact. Merrick's hands were shaking. He gripped the railing harder, but the shaking wouldn't stop. A sailor approached him, holding a clipboard. "Sir, they need you to sign the incident report." Merrick didn't look at him. He kept staring at the oil. The setting sun made it look like blood. 6 names, Merrick said quietly. "I need their names." The sailor hesitated. "Sir, that's not on the, Their names." The sailor read them slowly. Lieutenant Marcus Hayes, Staff Sergeant Daniel Ortiz, Corporal James Wu, Private First Class Robert Carlyle, Private Anthony DeLuca, Private Thomas Reed. Merrick repeated each name, burned them into his memory. He would never forget them. Never. "I'll get it right," he whispered to the oil slick. "I swear to God, I'll get it right." The sailor didn't understand. He walked away, leaving Merrick alone with the sunset and the ghosts. That was 15 months ago. Port, Moresby, New Guinea, August 15th, 1943. The workshop at Port Moresby smelled like machine oil and desperation. Captain Vincent "Pappy" Merrick had been in this space for 19 straight hours. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, attracting moths the size of small birds. His eyes burned from exhaustion and metal dust. On the workbench in front of him sat his obsession. A bomb. Not just any bomb, it weighed exactly 23 pounds. At the tail, where sleek metal fins should be, there was a small cardboard tube. Inside that tube, packed tight, was a white silk parachute. To anyone else it looked ridiculous, a child's toy, a joke. To Merrick it was redemption. For 15 months he'd watched American bombers fly over Japanese positions at 20,000 feet. He'd watched them drop 500-pound bombs, 1,000-pound bombs, massive demolition charges. He'd watched those bombs fall through the clouds, drift in the wind, and explode harmlessly in the jungle. The Japanese would laugh. They'd watch the Americans waste their ordnance on empty mud. Then they'd go back to work, servicing their Zeros, fueling their Bettys, preparing for the next strike against Allied positions. The problem was physics. At 20,000 feet, you couldn't hit a specific target. The margin of error was measured in football fields, and the Japanese had learned to exploit that. They built their airfields behind ridges. They parked their planes in U-shaped dirt walls, called revetments. From high altitude, those revetments were perfect protection. The only way to destroy a plane on the ground was to get low, 50 feet low, treetop low. But at 50 feet, if you dropped a standard bomb, the explosion would catch your own aircraft. The blast wave traveled upward faster than the plane could fly away. It was suicide, unless you could stop the bomb's forward momentum. Merrick stared at the silk parachute. In his mind, he saw the equations. Drag coefficient, terminal velocity, ballistic trajectory versus vertical descent. On the workbench, buried under technical drawings and empty coffee cups, was a photograph. 6 men in flight suits: Hayes, Ortiz, Wu, Carlyle, DeLuca, Reed. They were smiling. They didn't know they had 4 days left to live. Merrick touched the photograph gently. "This one won't fail," he said to the empty workshop. The door banged open. Lieutenant Dalton Hargrove stepped inside, squinting in the fluorescent light. Everyone called him Flint. He was 26, lean, with the easy confidence of a natural pilot. He'd flown 43 combat missions. He'd earned his call sign by being hard to break. "Pappy," Flint said, "you look like death walked over." "I'll sleep when it works. It's been 3 days straight. 19 hours, not 3 days. Flint walked to the workbench, looking at the bomb with the parachute tail. He picked it up, turned it over in his hands. "This is your secret weapon? Looks like something from a county fair." Merrick didn't answer. He was sketching calculations on a notepad, double-checking his math for the 100th time. Flint set the bomb down carefully. "Pappy, talk to me. General Sullivan's asking questions. The squadron thinks you've lost it. They're saying you've been in here so long you've gone native." "Let them say it." "They're saying you're wasting time on carnival prizes while men are dying." That made Merrick look up. His eyes were bloodshot, ringed with dark circles, but they were sharp, focused, not the eyes of a man who'd cracked. "How many planes did we lose last week?" Merrick asked. 4. "How many Japanese planes did we destroy?" Flint hesitated. "None confirmed." 0. "We lost 4 bombers, 16 men, and killed 0 enemy aircraft. That's not war, Flint. That's murder." "And I'm done being part of it." Flint studied his friend. Pappy Merrick was 42 years old, which made him ancient by Air Force standards. Most pilots were kids in their 20s. Merrick had been flying since before some of them were born. He'd been an engineer at Boeing before the war. He understood airframes, stress loads, aerodynamics in a way that most pilots never would. But something had changed after Coral Sea. The easygoing engineer had become obsessed. Driven, he worked 20-hour days, he skipped meals. He barely spoke to anyone outside of technical discussions. "General Sullivan wants to see you," Flint said. "Now." Merrick picked up the parafrag bomb, cradling it like it was precious. "Then let's not keep him waiting." General Sullivan's office. General Marcus Sullivan was 58 years old, built like a fire hydrant, and had the temperament of a wounded bear. He'd been fighting the Japanese in the Pacific since Pearl Harbor. He'd lost count of how many good men he'd buried in this godforsaken jungle. When Merrick walked into his office carrying the toy bomb, Sullivan didn't hide his skepticism. "That's it," Sullivan said. "That's what you've been working on?" "Yes, sir." "It has a parachute?" "Yes, sir." "Merrick, I asked you to solve our bombing problem. You brought me a goddamn birthday present." Merrick set the bomb on Sullivan's desk gently. "Sir, permission to explain." "Ye?" Sullivan leaned back in his chair. It creaked under his weight. "This better be good. We just got intelligence that the Japanese have over 200 aircraft at Wewak. 200. They're planning a major offensive. If we don't destroy those planes on the ground, they're going to destroy us in the air, and you're playing with handkerchiefs." "It's silk, sir, not a handkerchief." "I don't give a damn if it's the Queen's wedding veil. Will it kill Japanese planes?" Merrick picked up a pencil from Sullivan's desk. He held it horizontally, about chest height. "Imagine this pencil is a B-25 bomber flying at 50 feet above the ground, 200 miles per hour. He let go of the pencil. It clattered on the desk. "Standard bomb, no parachute, falls forward and down. By the time it hits the ground, the plane has only traveled maybe 100 yards. The explosion catches the tail, plane goes down, everyone dies." Sullivan's face was unreadable. "I'm aware of the problem, Captain. That's why we bomb from altitude." "Which doesn't work. The Japanese are dug in. Revetments protect their planes from high-altitude bombing." Merrick picked up a piece of paper from Sullivan's desk. He crumpled it into a loose ball, then held it at the same height as before. Same bomber, same altitude, same speed, but this time we attach a parachute. He dropped the paper. It fluttered down slowly, drifting almost straight to the desk. The parachute deploys instantly. It stops the forward momentum. The bomb falls almost vertically while the plane continues forward at full speed. By the time the bomb hits the ground, the plane is 300 yards away, outside the blast radius. He looked at Sullivan directly. The parachute doesn't make it float gently, sir. It makes it a brake, and it makes low-level bombing survivable. Sullivan stared at the crumpled paper on his desk, then at the bomb with its silk tail, then at Merrick. "You're telling me this carnival trick solves the physics problem?" "Yes, sir." "And you're certain?" Merrick thought of 6 names, but he didn't say them. Not here, not now. "I'm certain of the math, sir. I need to test it in the air." Sullivan stood up, walking to the window. Outside, the airfield stretched out under the brutal sun. B-25 bombers sat in their revetments being serviced by ground crews. Beyond the airfield, the jungle went on forever, and beyond that jungle, 200 Japanese aircraft waited. "How many can a single plane carry?" "Standard payload, 60 parafrag units, maybe 70 if we strip out unnecessary weight." Sullivan did the math in his head. "If we hit Wewak with 70 bombers, that's over 4,000 bombs." "Yes, sir." 4,000 of these little toys." "Yes, sir."
Sullivan turned around. His face was still skeptical, but there was something else now, a glimmer of desperate hope. "Test it. Tomorrow morning, take one of the old birds, fly over the ocean, and prove to me this works. If it does, you have 72 hours to produce 10,000 of these things." "Sir, I'll need access to whatever you need. Machinists, fabric, priorities. I'll sign the orders."
"But Merrick..." "Yes, sir." "If this fails, if you crash another plane because of a design flaw, I will personally make sure you never touch another aircraft for the rest of this war. Are we clear?" The words hit Merrick like a punch. Sullivan knew about Coral Sea. Of course he did. He knew about the 6 dead men. He knew about the fuel system failure. "Crystal clear, sir." "Dismissed." Merrick picked up his parafrag bomb and walked out. Flint was waiting in the hallway. "How bad?" Flint asked. "I have until tomorrow to prove I'm not insane." "And if you can't?" Merrick looked at the bomb in his hands. Then 6 men died for nothing. The test flight, August 16th, 0600 hours. The sun was barely up when Merrick climbed into the cockpit of the B-25. It was an older model, scarred with patches where flak had torn through the aluminum skin. The ground crew had loaded a single parafrag bomb in the bay. Flint was in the co-pilot seat. "You don't have to come," Merrick said. "Someone needs to witness this, and if you crash, someone needs to tell the story." Ever the optimist? I learned from the best. Merrick fired up the right Cyclone engines. They coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. The vibration shook the entire airframe. He loved that feeling, the raw power of 18 cylinders churning through fuel, turning potential energy into thrust. He released the brakes and taxied to the runway. Sullivan was standing outside the control tower, binoculars around his neck. Half the base had turned out to watch. Word had spread. Crazy Pappy Merrick was going to test his toy bomb. Betting pools had formed. Most money was on catastrophic failure. Merrick pushed the throttles forward. The B-25 accelerated down the runway, heavy and sluggish until the wings found lift. The wheels left the ground. The jungle dropped away beneath them. He flew out over the Coral Sea. The water was calm today, blue and endless. Somewhere down there, 6 men rested in the deep. He tried not to think about it. "Test altitude," Merrick said. 50 feet above sea level, 200 miles per hour. "You're actually going to do this," Flint said. "You sound surprised." I was hoping you'd reconsider. Merrick descended until the bomber was skimming the waves. At this height, the margin for error was measured in seconds. If he sneezed, they'd cartwheel into the ocean. The propellers kicked up spray. Salt water misted the windscreen. "Bomb bay doors open," Merrick said. The hydraulics whined. The doors yawned open beneath them. Wind roared through the bay. "Release in 3, 2, 1, mark." He pulled the release. The parafrag tumbled out of the bay. Merrick counted. 1 Mississippi. 2 Mississippi. Behind them, through the small rear window, he saw it. The white silk parachute deployed instantly. It caught the air with a snap that was almost audible over the engine noise. The bomb stopped moving forward. It hung in the air for a fraction of a second, then began to drop almost straight down. The B-25 continued forward at 200 miles per hour. The bomb hit the water 300 yards behind them. The explosion sent up a plume of white spray. Shrapnel created a perfect circle of disturbance on the surface. If there had been an aircraft there, it would have been shredded. Merrick's hands were shaking on the yoke, but this time it wasn't from fear. "It worked," Flint said quietly. "It worked," Merrick repeated. He keyed the radio. "Tower, this is Merrick. Test successful. Repeat, test successful. Request immediate meeting with General Sullivan." The radio crackled. "Copy that, Merrick. The General says to get your ass back here and start building bombs." Merrick allowed himself a small smile, the first in 15 months. "For you," he whispered to the ocean. "For all 6 of you." The squadron briefing, August 16th, 1400 hours. The briefing room was packed. Every pilot in the squadron was there. They sat on benches, leaned against walls, filled every available space. The room smelled like sweat, cigarettes, and anticipation. General Sullivan stood at the front, next to a covered map on an easel. Merrick stood to the side, holding one of his parafrag bombs. The muttering and joking died down when Sullivan cleared his throat. "Gentlemen," Sullivan began, "we have a target and we have a weapon." He pulled the cover off the map. It showed the northern coast of New Guinea. 4 airfields clustered together. Wewak, Boram, Dagua. But someone whistled low. "That's the fortress." "Correct," Sullivan said. "Intelligence confirms over 200 enemy aircraft stationed there. Zeros, Oscars, Betty bombers, Sally transports. It's the largest concentration of Japanese air power in the Southwest Pacific." He let that sink in. "We're going to destroy it, all of it, in one strike, tomorrow morning, 0600 hours. The room erupted. Voices overlapped. "That's suicide! Wewak has 500 anti-aircraft guns. We can't get close without being shredded." Sullivan let them vent for 30 seconds. Then he slammed his hand on the table. The sound cracked like a gunshot. Silence fell. "Captain Merrick, show them." Merrick stepped forward, holding the parafrag bomb. Most of the pilots had already heard about it, seen the crates being unloaded, laughed about it in the mess hall. Lieutenant Raymond Castellano, a 22-year-old kid everyone called Rook because he was always thinking 3 moves ahead, spoke up. "Sir, with respect, that's a hand grenade with a party favor attached." Some of the pilots laughed. Not meanly, exactly, but there was skepticism in the room thick enough to cut. Merrick didn't get angry. He'd expected this. "You're right, Lieutenant. It weighs 23 pounds. A standard bomb is 500 pounds. This looks ridiculous." "Then why are we using it?" another pilot called out. "Because this ridiculous toy solves a problem that 500-pound bombs can't." He walked to the blackboard and drew a simple diagram. A plane, a bomb, the trajectory. "You've all seen the test footage from this morning. The parachute stops forward momentum. Bomb drops vertically. You escape the blast. Questions on the physics?" Heads shook. They understood the concept. They just didn't believe it would work in combat. "There's a second part," Sullivan said. He gestured to Merrick. Merrick pulled back a tarp in the corner of the room. Underneath was a B-25 nose cone, but it wasn't the standard clear plexiglass Bombardier nose. It was solid metal, and bolted to that metal were 8.50 caliber machine guns. The room went dead silent. "At 50 feet, Merrick said, "you're not bombing, you're strafing. These guns give you suppressing fire. You silence the anti-aircraft positions on your approach. Then you drop the parafrags. Then you get out." He let them stare at the guns. "Each gun fires 800 rounds per minute. 8 guns together, 9,600 rounds per minute. That's 160 rounds every single second. A 3-second burst puts almost 500 bullets into a target area the size of a football field." Someone in the back whispered, "Jesus Christ." "We've modified 20 B-25s with this configuration," Sullivan said. "Captain Merrick designed it, he tested it, and tomorrow he's flying Lead Bird." That got their attention. If the designer was willing to bet his own life, maybe it wasn't suicide. "Here's the reality," Sullivan continued. His voice was hard now, no room for doubt. "The Japanese are planning a major offensive. If we don't stop them now, they will own the skies, and if they own the skies, they will push us back into the ocean. This is our chance, maybe our only chance." He looked around the room, met eyes with each pilot. "I won't lie to you, tomorrow will be the most dangerous mission any of you have ever flown. Some of you won't come back, but if we succeed, we break the back of Japanese air power in New Guinea. We turn the tide of this war." The weight of it settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Rook raised his hand. Sullivan nodded at him. "Sir, how many of these toy bombs will we each carry?" 60 minimum, 70 if you're stripped down." "And we're all flying this low-level run?" "Affirmative." Rook looked at the parafrag in Merrick's hands, then at the 8-gun nose, then at Sullivan. "Well," Rook said slowly, "I guess if we're going to die, might as well die doing something nobody's ever done before."
A few pilots laughed. Nervous laughter, but real. Sullivan almost smiled. Almost. "Dismissed. Get your affairs in order. Write your letters. Make your peace. We launch at 0500. Be ready." The pilots filed out slowly, talking in low voices. Some looked scared. Some looked excited. Most looked like men trying to convince themselves they weren't about to die. Merrick stayed behind, staring at the parafrag bomb in his hands. Flint walked up to him. "You really think this will work?" "The physics works. I tested it." "That's not what I asked." Merrick set the bomb down gently. "I think if we do everything right, if the weather holds, if the Japanese don't see us coming, if the parachutes all deploy correctly, we might destroy a lot of planes and lose only some of ours." "That's not exactly inspiring." "War doesn't inspire, Flint. It demands action despite terror." Flint studied his friend.
"What terrifies you?" Merrick didn't answer right away. He thought of Hayes, Ortiz, Wu, Carlyle, DeLuca, Reed. "I'm terrified, he said quietly, "that I'm about to make the same mistake. Twice." The night before, August 16th, 2300 hours, the parafrag assembly line worked through the night. Merrick had commandeered an entire hangar. Machinists, armorers, and volunteers from every squadron formed production teams. The process was simple, but it had to be perfect. Each bomb casing was inspected for cracks. Each explosive charge was measured precisely. Each silk parachute was packed into its cardboard tube. Each wire lanyard was threaded through the release mechanism. Merrick walked to the line, checking every station. He'd been awake for 38 hours straight. His eyes felt like sandpaper. His hands had stopped shaking because they were too numb to shake. At Station 7, a young sergeant was threading the wire lanyards that would pull the parachutes open. Merrick watched him work. The sergeant's hands were quick, efficient. Thread, loop, tie. Thread, loop, tie. "Stop," Merrick said. The sergeant froze. "Sir?" Merrick picked up the bomb the sergeant had just finished. He examined the wire connection. Then he tested the tension. The wire slipped loose. This would fail, Merrick said quietly. In the air, this parachute wouldn't deploy. The bomb would skip across the ground and explode under our own planes. The sergeant's face went pale. Sir, I followed the instructions exactly. Merrick looked down the assembly line. They'd already completed 400 bombs at this station. How many have you done tonight? Maybe 300? Merrick felt his stomach drop. He walked to the completed bomb pile and started inspecting them randomly. 1 in 4 had the same problem. The wire tension was wrong. Not obviously wrong, just wrong enough to fail under stress. Staff Sergeant Emmett Garrison, the chief mechanic everyone called Fix because there was nothing he couldn't repair, noticed Merrick's expression. Problem, Captain? We have a quality control issue. The wire lanyards on approximately 25% of bombs from this station are defective. We need to re-inspect every unit. Fix looked at the mountain of completed bombs. Sir, that's over 800 units from this line alone. 4,000 total across all production. We launch in 6 hours. Then we have 6 hours. Sir, the men are exhausted. We can't. Yes, we can, because if we don't, we'll kill our own people. Merrick's voice carried across the hangar. The entire assembly line stopped. Men looked up, exhausted, scared. Listen up, Merrick called out. We have a defect rate of approximately 25% on wire lanyards. These will fail in flight. If they fail, men die. Our men, your friends. He paused, letting that sink in. We have 6 hours to re-inspect every bomb and fix the defects. That means no sleep, no breaks. But it also means that when we fly into hell tomorrow morning, we fly knowing our weapons won't betray us. He looked around the hangar, saw tired faces, scared faces, determined faces. Who's with me? Fix stepped forward first, then the young sergeant who'd made the mistake. Then another machinist, then another. Within 60 seconds, every man in the hangar was back at his station. They worked through the night. Merrick personally inspected every single bomb at the defective station. 847 units from that line. He checked each wire lanyard, each parachute fold, each explosive charge, then spot-checked the other 3 production lines. His fingers bled. His vision blurred. He drank coffee that tasted like battery acid. At 04:30 hours, with 30 minutes until launch, the last bomb was certified safe. Fix walked up to Merrick, wiping grease from his hands. They're loaded, Captain. 70 birds, 60 bombs each, 4,200 total, all inspected, all certified. Thank you, Fix. Sir, you should rest. I'll rest when we get back. And if we don't? Merrick looked at the now empty hangar. The assembly line was quiet. The men had already gone to their aircraft. Then I'll rest forever, knowing I didn't kill them through negligence. He picked up his flight gear and walked out into the pre-dawn darkness. The airfield was alive with activity. Ground crews were making final checks. Pilots were climbing into cockpits. Engines were coughing to life, one by one, until the entire field roared with mechanical thunder. Merrick walked to his B-25. Someone had painted a name on the nose, Second Chance. Flint was already in the co-pilot seat. You look like death walked over, Flint said. Feel worse? Should you really be flying? Before Merrick could answer, Fix appeared at the aircraft carrying a toolbox. Sir, all bombs triple-checked. Wire tension's perfect. You're good to go. Merrick climbed into the pilot seat. The familiar controls greeted him like old friends. Thank you, Fix, for everything. Fix saluted. Bring her back, Captain. I'll try. Merrick fired up the engines. Fired up. They caught immediately, smooth and powerful. He taxied toward the runway, Behind him, 70 B-25 bombers fell into line, the largest strike force ever assembled in the Southwest Pacific. They were going to Wewak. They were carrying 4,000 toy bombs, and Captain Vincent "Pappy" Merrick, the man who'd designed those toys, was going to prove that mockery could become a miracle, or die trying. The Owen Stanley Mountains, 0547 hours. The formation of 70 B-25 Mitchell bombers flew in radio silence. Below them, the Owen Stanley Mountains rose out of the jungle like the broken teeth of some prehistoric beast, jagged peaks, mist-filled valleys, the kind of terrain that killed careless pilots even without enemy fire. Merrick flew lead, his eyes scanning the horizon. The cockpit vibrated with the familiar rhythm of the Wright Cyclone engines. 18 cylinders per engine, 2 engines per aircraft, 70 bombers total, 2,520 cylinders churning fuel into power, into thrust. The sound was a physical thing. You didn't just hear it, you felt it in your chest, in your bones. Flint sat in the co-pilot seat, checking their navigation against the map on his knee. They'd been flying for 43 minutes. Another 17 minutes to target. The sun was rising behind them, turning the eastern sky into bands of orange and gold. It would have been beautiful if Merrick had any attention left for beauty. All his focus was on the formation. 70 aircraft, 4,200 parafrag bombs, over 400 men, all betting their lives on his design. He thought about the night before, 847 bombs from one defective line. Thousands more spot-checked. If he'd missed even one, if a single parachute failed at the wrong moment— "Stop it," Flint said quietly. Merrick glanced at him. "Stop what?" "Thinking about what could go wrong. You triple-checked everything, the bombs are good." "I double-checked them at Coral Sea too." "That was a fuel system. This is different. You learned, you improved. Have faith in that." Faith. Merrick almost laughed. Faith was for men who hadn't killed 6 people through hubris. The radio crackled. The voice of the weather scout, flying ahead in a stripped-down P-38 Lightning. "Lead, this is Scout 1. I have eyes on target." Merrick keyed his mic. "Scout 1, report conditions." There was a pause, a long pause. That wasn't good. "Lead, we have a problem. Heavy fog bank over target area. Visibility near 0. I can barely see the coastline." Every pilot in the formation heard it. Merrick could imagine their reactions: fear, relief, the guilty hope that the mission would be scrubbed. Flint looked at Merrick. Fog wasn't in the forecast. "Weather doesn't care about forecasts." The radio crackled again. General Sullivan's voice transmitting from Port Moresby. "Merrick, this is command. Weather Scout confirms adverse conditions. You are authorized to abort and return to base." Authorized to abort. Merrick could turn the formation around right now, fly back to Port Moresby, tell Sullivan the weather made it impossible. No one would blame him. You didn't fly a low-level attack run in heavy fog. That was suicide. But the Japanese aircraft would still be at Wewak tomorrow, and the day after, and eventually they'd launch their offensive, and Americans would die. Merrick made a decision. "Command, this is lead," Merrick said. His voice was calm, steady. "Fog is an advantage. The Japanese won't hear us coming until we're on top of them. We proceed." Silence on the radio, then Sullivan's voice, different now, respectful. "Acknowledged, lead. It's your call. Good hunting." Flint stared at Merrick. "Did you just commit us to flying 50 feet above the ground in 0 visibility?" "The fog will break over the target. It always does." "And if it doesn't?" "Then we follow the coastline in and trust our instruments." "That's not a plan, Pappy. That's hoping physics feels generous." Merrick adjusted his altitude, beginning the descent toward attack level. Behind him, 70 bombers followed. Physics is never generous, Flint, but it's consistent. The fog is moisture. Moisture needs temperature differential. Over land, the sun burns it off. We'll have maybe 30 seconds of visibility, that's enough. 30 seconds to find the target, line up and drop. Yes, you're insane. Probably. They crossed the last ridge of the Owen Stanley Range and dropped down toward the coast. The altimeter unwound. 10,000 feet, 5,000, 2,000, 1,000. At 500 feet, they entered the fog bank. The world disappeared. 1 second, Merrick could see the ocean below, the jungle ahead, the sky above. The next second, nothing. Just thick, grey, nothing pressing against the windscreen. He flew on instruments, airspeed, altitude, heading. The numbers were reliable, even when his eyes were useless. Altitude 300 feet, Flint called out. 250, 200. The fog was so thick it was almost liquid. Merrick could barely see his own wingtips. 100 feet, 50, Pappy, we need to pull up. Hold course. We're going to hit the water. Hold course. Merrick's hands were steady on the yoke, but his heart was hammering. At 50 feet, in zero visibility, there was no margin for error. If his altimeter was off by even 10 feet, if there was an unexpected wave, if he descended another 6 inches... The radio came alive with panicked voices from other aircraft. I can't see anything. Where's the lead bird? We're going to crash. Merrick keyed his mic. His voice cut through the panic like a knife. All aircraft, maintain formation, trust your instruments, follow my engine sound. We break out in 60 seconds. How do you know? Someone demanded. Because I did the math. Now shut up and fly. The seconds crawled by. 59, 58, 57. Merrick could see nothing but grey. His instruments showed 50 feet altitude, 210 miles per hour airspeed, heading 340 degrees. The numbers had to be right. They had to be. 30 seconds, 20, 10. And then, like a curtain being pulled back, they broke through. The fog ended abruptly. One moment, grey nothing. The next moment, clear air and visibility for miles. Below them, the coast of New Guinea, and dead ahead, 4 Japanese airfields. Wee-Whack Airfield Complex. 0604 hours. Merrick's first thought was that intelligence had undersold it. There weren't 200 Japanese aircraft. There were more, many more. The 4 airfields, Wee-Whack, Boram, Dagwa, and Butt, stretched out in a rough line along the coast. Runways carved out of the jungle, taxiways connecting them like arteries. And on those taxiways, parked in neat rows, were aircraft, Zeros, the sleek fighters that had dominated the Pacific skies for 2 years. Oscars, more fighters, heavier, less maneuverable but deadly. Betty bombers, twin-engine medium bombers, the workhorses of the Japanese Navy. Sally transports, fat, slow, vulnerable. And, scattered among them, mechanics, fuel trucks, ammunition carriers. The entire logistics train of an air force preparing for a major operation. They had no idea death was approaching at 210 miles per hour. Merrick keyed his mic. His voice was ice. All wings, this is lead. Target confirmed. Multiple contacts. We go weapons hot on my mark. He glanced at Flint. Arm the guns. Flint flipped the master switch. 8 50-caliber machine guns hummed to life, electric motors charging the firing mechanisms. The nose of the B-25 bristled with barely contained violence. Merrick wrapped his right hand around the control yoke. His index finger rested on the firing button. One button controlled all 8 guns. The formation tightened. 70 bombers flying line abreast, a wall of aluminum and guns stretching nearly half a mile wide. It was the most aggressive tactical formation in military aviation. It maximized forward firepower. It also meant if one plane went down, it could take others with it, but it would deliver overwhelming violence in a single, concentrated blow. They were 3 miles from the target. 2 miles, 1 mile. Merrick could see individual Japanese mechanics now, crawling over aircraft, servicing engines, loading ammunition. One man was drinking from a canteen, another was smoking a cigarette. None of them were looking up. Half a mile, a Japanese ground crew captain finally noticed. Merrick saw him freeze, saw him point, saw his mouth open to shout. "Guns hot," Merrick said. "Fire." He pressed the button. The world exploded into violence. 8 .50 caliber machine guns erupted simultaneously. The recoil was massive, brutal. The entire aircraft shuddered. The nose guns created a stream of tracers that looked like a solid orange line connecting the bomber to the ground. Where the bullets hit, things disintegrated. The Japanese captain, with his mouth open, simply ceased to exist. One moment, a human being. The next moment, pink mist and falling pieces. A fuel truck exploded. The fireball rose 50 feet. A Zero fighter in the middle of refueling caught the stream of bullets. The bullets shredded the thin aluminum skin like tissue paper. They punched through the cockpit. They hit the fuel tank. The plane didn't burn, it vaporized, and Merrick's aircraft was just one of 70. The sound was apocalyptic. 70 B-25s, each with 12 .50 caliber machine guns, all firing at once. That was 840 guns, over 14,000 rounds per second, hammering into the target. The ground erupted, dust, smoke, debris, bodies. The tracers created a storm of orange light. Japanese soldiers dove for cover, but there was no cover. The bullets found them. The bullets found everything. Anti-aircraft positions tried to respond. A gun crew swung their cannon toward the approaching bombers. Merrick adjusted his aim 2 degrees and held the trigger. His guns chewed through the sandbag emplacement. The gun crew died before they could fire a single shot. 3 seconds of sustained fire. Merrick released the button. The guns fell silent, barrels glowing red-hot. They were directly over the first row of parked aircraft now. "Bomb bay doors open," Merrick ordered. Flint pulled the lever. Hydraulics whined. The doors beneath the aircraft yawned open. Merrick could see a Japanese Betty bomber directly below him, perfectly parked, fueled and armed for a mission that would never happen. Release. He pulled the bomb release. 60 parafrag bombs tumbled out of the bay. For a fraction of a second they fell forward with the aircraft's momentum. Then the slipstream caught the cardboard tubes at their tails. The white silk parachutes deployed with 60 simultaneous snaps. It looked like a sudden snowstorm. The forward momentum stopped dead. The bombs hung in the air, drifting downward almost vertically while the B-25 continued at full speed. Merrick watched in his mirror. The parachutes were beautiful, white silk against blue sky, peaceful, gentle. Then the first bomb hit the ground. The explosion wasn't large, but it wasn't the blast that mattered. It was the fragmentation. The bomb casing was pre-scored, designed to shatter into hundreds of razor-sharp steel fragments. When it detonated, those fragments exploded outward in a perfect 360-degree circle at waist height. The Betty bomber took 17 fragments through its fuselage. One fragment punctured a fuel tank. Aviation gasoline sprayed out, hit the hot metal from the explosion, and ignited. The bomber didn't catch fire. It became fire. Then the second parafrag hit, and the third, and the fourth. 60 bombs, 60 detonations, 60 circles of steel fragments shredding everything within a 50-foot radius. And that was just from Merrick's aircraft. 70 bombers, 4,200 bombs total. The sky filled with white parachutes. It looked like a celebration, like confetti at a parade, the most absurd, ridiculous sight in a war zone. And then the confetti hit the ground. The entire airfield complex erupted. Zeros exploded. Oscars disintegrated. Bettys turned into bonfires. The fuel trucks detonated in secondary blasts that threw burning gasoline across the tarmac. The Japanese had built revetments to protect their aircraft from high-altitude bombing, U-shaped dirt walls that could deflect the blast from a 500-pound bomb landing 50 yards away. But the parafrag bombs didn't land 50 yards away, they landed directly inside the revetments. They dropped straight down from above. The dirt walls that were supposed to protect the aircraft instead trapped them. The revetments became killing boxes. Merrick pulled up, climbing away from the target. Behind him, the airfield was a vision of hell. Black smoke rose in columns, orange flames danced across the runway. Explosions continued as fuel and ammunition cooked off. He'd done it. The physics worked. The parafrag bombs worked. And then everything went wrong. The malfunction, 0608 hours. The radio exploded with a panicked scream. "Second wave, abort, abort, bombs not deploying!" Merrick's blood turned to ice. He looked back. The second wave of bombers was making their approach over the now alerted airfield. Japanese anti-aircraft guns that had survived the first pass were coming alive. Tracers filled the sky, and the parafrag bombs from the second wave weren't deploying their parachutes. He saw it happen. A B-25 released its load. The bombs tumbled out, but the silk parachutes stayed folded in their cardboard tubes. The bombs continued forward, skipping across the ground like flat stones on water. Some exploded harmlessly in the jungle. Some exploded on the runway, creating useless craters, and one exploded directly beneath the B-25 that had dropped it. The bomber was flying at 50 feet. The explosion caught it full in the belly. The blast tore through the thin aluminum skin, through the fuel tanks, through the bomb bay that still held 48 unexploded bombs. The aircraft became a fireball. It didn't crash. It disintegrated. Pieces rained down across the airfield. 6 men died in less than a second. Merrick's vision tunneled. The cockpit seemed to shrink around him. The defective wire lanyards. He'd inspected 847 bombs from the one defective line, but there had been over 4,000 bombs total produced across multiple lines, the other production stations, the ones he hadn't personally supervised every single unit. How many were defective? 10%? 25%? Another B-25 exploded, this one from a skip bomb that bounced off a concrete runway and detonated at altitude. The plane cartwheeled through the air, trailing fire. "Lead, this is third wing." The voice was barely controlled panic. "We've got mass failures."
Parachutes not deploying. We're killing ourselves. Merrick's hands gripped the yoke so hard his knuckles went white. 6 names echoed in his head. Hayes, Ortiz, Wu, Carlisle, DeLuca, Reed. Now more names would join them. Names of men who trusted his design. Men who died because he hadn't been thorough enough. Again. Flint grabbed his shoulder. "Pappy, we need to order a retreat." But Merrick was looking at the target.
Through the smoke and fire, he could see dozens of Japanese aircraft still intact, parked in areas the first wave hadn't reached. Already, Japanese pilots were running toward them, trying to get airborne, trying to fight back. If they retreated now with half the target still viable, the Japanese would recover, they'd repair, they'd launch their offensive, and men would die, American men. Soldiers and sailors and Marines who would face Japanese bombers that should have been destroyed here, today, by bombs that should have worked. Merrick made a decision. It was possibly the worst decision he'd ever made, or possibly the best. "All aircraft," he said into the radio. His voice was cold, calm, inhuman. "Continue attack. Drop remaining ordnance. Hit every target." "Sir, the bombs are defective." "Then get lower. Drop from 25 feet. The blast radius is 50 feet. Stay ahead of it. That's suicide." "Do it anyway. We don't leave until WW2 is burning." He banked hard, bringing his B-25 around for a second pass. Alone. Flint stared at him. "Pappy, what are you doing?" "Finishing the job." "You'll be killed." "Maybe, but I won't run." He dove back toward the airfield. The Japanese anti-aircraft guns, no longer suppressed, opened fire with everything they had. Tracers filled the sky like angry red fireflies. A shell exploded 10 feet off his right wing. Shrapnel tore through the aluminum skin. Warning lights blazed on the instrument panel. Hydraulic failure. Fuel pressure dropping. Engine temperature rising. Merrick ignored them all. He flew straight and level at 30 feet above the ground, directly into the face of 500 guns. His remaining machine gun ammunition was nearly spent, but he fired anyway. Short, controlled bursts, suppressing, forcing the gunners to duck. "Bomb bay doors open," he said. "Pappy, we already dropped our load." Emergency stores, dorsal bay. Flint pulled the backup release. 20 additional parafrag bombs tumbled out. This time, Merrick watched them fall, counted them. 1, 2, 3. Parachutes deployed. 4, 5, 6. Deployed. 7, 8. Failed. The bombs skipped across the tarmac. 9, 10. Deployed. 75% success rate. Not perfect, but enough. The bombs that worked hit a cluster of intact zeros. The bombs that failed exploded harmlessly behind them. Below, Japanese aircraft burned, but Merrick's B-25 was dying. The right engine coughed, sputtered, seized. The propeller froze. Without the engine's power, the aircraft began to yaw hard to the right. Merrick fought the controls, using full left rudder to maintain heading. "Right engine's dead," Flint shouted. "Fuel tank's punctured. We're losing hydraulics." Warning bells screamed. The cockpit filled with smoke. Behind them, the rest of the formation was completing their runs. More Japanese aircraft exploded. The airfield was a sea of fire now. The mission was succeeding, but Merrick's aircraft wasn't going to make it home. "We need to bail out," Flint said. "Over Japanese territory, we'd be captured in an hour." "Better than dead." Debatable. Merrick struggled with the yoke. The aircraft was barely responding. One engine out. Hydraulics failing, fuel leaking. They were maybe 5 minutes from catastrophic failure. The Owen Stanley Mountains rose ahead, jagged, unforgiving. "We're not going to clear the mountains," Flint said quietly. Merrick didn't answer. He was doing math. Weight, thrust, drag, lift. The equations that had always made sense, the equations that had never lied to him. The math said they were going to crash. But the math at Coral Sea had said the fuel system would work. Maybe he was done trusting math. "Hold on," Merrick said. He pointed the nose at the lowest gap in the mountain range. The aircraft shuddered, protested. The remaining engine screamed, redlining, giving everything it had. They entered the pass at 300 feet. The rock walls blurred past on either side. One wrong twitch and they'd slam into granite. The aircraft was vibrating so violently Merrick's vision blurred. His teeth rattled. His hands were numb on the controls. They cleared the pass by less than 50 feet. On the other side, the terrain dropped away. The airfield at Port Moresby was visible in the distance, 20 miles. The engine fire warning light illuminated. The left engine was burning now, 15 miles. The cockpit filled with smoke. Merrick couldn't see the instruments. He was flying by feel now, by instinct. 10 miles. "Pappy," Flint said. His voice was surprisingly calm. "It's been an honor. We're not dead yet." 5 miles. The left engine exploded, not just failed. Exploded. The cowling tore off. Flames streamed behind them like a comet's tail. They were gliding now. No engines, no power, just momentum and gravity. Port Moresby airfield, dead ahead. Merrick dropped the landing gear manually. The wheels locked down with a heavy clunk. "Brace for impact," he said. The B-25 hit the runway hard. The landing gear collapsed immediately. The aircraft slammed down on its belly. Metal shrieked, sparks flew. They slid down the runway at 80 miles per hour, shedding pieces. The right wing tore off, the nose crumpled. They spun 90 degrees, still sliding. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they stopped. Merrick tried to move, couldn't. Something was pinning his legs. The cockpit had crumpled around him. "Flint?" No answer. "Flint!" Movement to his right. Flint stirred, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead. "I'm alive," Flint groaned. Somehow, outside, fire trucks were racing toward them. Men were running. Someone was shouting orders. The canopy was jammed. Merrick pushed at it. Nothing. "Fire!" someone screamed outside. "The fuel tanks are going to blow." Hands grabbed at the canopy from outside. Crowbars appeared. The plexiglass shattered. Arms reached in, pulling Merrick out. His legs didn't work. He couldn't feel them. They dragged him away from the wreck, laid him on the tarmac. Someone was pressing on his chest. Someone else was shouting for a medic. General Sullivan appeared above him, face grim. "You stupid, magnificent bastard," Sullivan said. Merrick tried to speak. His mouth was full of blood. He spat it out. "Did it work?" he managed. "The mission?" "Yes." Sullivan looked at him for a long moment. "We're still counting. But Merrick, I think you just changed this war." Merrick closed his eyes. "I got it right this time," he whispered. "I promise I got it right." And then the darkness took him. Port Moresby Field Hospital, August 18th, 1943. Merrick woke to the smell of disinfectant and blood. The hospital tent was stifling. Flies buzzed against the canvas. Somewhere nearby, a man was screaming. The morphine hadn't reached him yet. Merrick tried to sit up. Pain lanced through his chest. Broken ribs, maybe 3. "Stay down, Captain." A nurse appeared above him, young, exhausted. She'd probably been working for 20 hours straight. Her hands were gentle as she checked his bandages. "How long?" Merrick's voice was a rasp. 18 hours since they pulled you from the wreck. "You're lucky to be alive." "Lucky?" He almost laughed. It hurt too much. "My co-pilot?" "Lieutenant Hargrove is fine. Concussion, some lacerations, but he'll fly again." Merrick closed his eyes. Flint would live. That was something. "The mission," he said. "I need to know about the mission." The nurse hesitated.
"I don't have that information, sir, but General Sullivan left orders to notify him when you woke. I'll send word." She left. Merrick stared at the canvas ceiling. His mind was working through the memories, the approach, the strafing run, the parafrag bombs tumbling out, the parachutes that failed, the B-25 that exploded, and another. How many had he seen go down? 3, 4. The tent flap opened. General Sullivan ducked inside, followed by a younger officer carrying a folder.
Sullivan pulled up a stool and sat down heavily. He looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. "You're awake," Sullivan said. "Good. We need to talk." "How many did we lose?" Sullivan didn't soften it. He'd never been one for gentle truths. 18 aircraft went down. 72 men killed or missing. Most losses were from parachute failures. The bombs skipped, exploded under our own planes, or detonated too close. 72. The number hit Merrick like a physical blow. "It was my fault," Merrick said. "I didn't inspect all the bombs. I should have—" "Merrick, shut up and listen." Sullivan opened the folder. Inside were reconnaissance photographs, black and white images of WW2 taken from a P-38 that had flown over the target 6 hours after the raid. He spread them on the bed. The photographs showed devastation, complete and total devastation. Runways cratered, hangars collapsed, fuel dumps still burning, and scattered across every square inch of the airfield complex, the twisted wreckage of aircraft. "We've been counting," Sullivan said. 3 different intelligence teams cross-referencing. The final number is confirmed. He pulled out a typed report. 107 Japanese aircraft destroyed, 53 more damaged beyond immediate repair. The airfield infrastructure is gone. Fuel stores are gone. Ammunition stores are gone. Personnel casualties estimated at over 200, including pilots, mechanics, and ground crew. Sullivan looked at Merrick directly. We intercepted Japanese communications. Their high command is calling August 17th Kuroi High, Black Day. The admiral responsible for Wewak committed seppuku. They've ordered a complete evacuation of the remaining forces in the sector. He paused, letting that sink in. Merrick, in 15 minutes you broke the back of Japanese air power in New Guinea. You just handed us air superiority in this entire theater. We lost 72 men. Those 72 men saved thousands. Merrick stared at the photographs. 107 aircraft. He could see them in the images. Zeros reduced to skeletal frames. Betty bombers that were just black smudges on the tarmac. The parachute failures, he said quietly. The investigation found that the defective bombs came from production line 3, a worker who lost his brother at Pearl Harbor. Mentally unstable, he thought he was helping by simplifying the design. He removed wire reinforcements. Sullivan closed the folder. You personally inspected line 7 and caught hundreds of defects. You saved dozens of lives. The ones that failed, you couldn't have known. 72 men are still dead. Yes, they are. And their sacrifice won this theater. Don't dishonor them by drowning in guilt. Honor them by making damn sure the weapon they died testing becomes the weapon that ends this war. Sullivan stood. I'm recommending you for the Congressional Medal of Honor. No, that wasn't a request, Captain. I won't accept it. Give it to the crews, to those who didn't come back. Sullivan studied him for a long moment. You're a stubborn bastard, Merrick. Yes, sir. Fine. Unit citation. The entire squadron shares the honor, but you're staying on as Chief of Tactical Innovation. Your parafrag bomb is going into mass production, 500,000 units by year's end, and you're going to design the next generation. Sir, I should be grounded. Those men died saving this war, Captain. Now rest. That's an order. Sullivan left. Merrick lay in the bed, staring at the photographs. 107 aircraft, 72 men. The math was simple, brutal, unavoidable. The evolution, September 1943 to August 1945. 6 weeks later, Merrick was back in the workshop. His ribs had healed. The burns on his hands had scarred over. He walked with a slight limp now, a souvenir from the crash landing, but his mind was sharp as ever. The parafrag bomb had become the standard weapon of the Pacific War. Production lines ran 24 hours a day. The design had been refined, improved, made foolproof. Every bomb was now triple inspected. The wire lanyard failures had been eliminated through better training and mandatory stress testing. October 1943, Philippines campaign. Merrick stood in a recaptured Manila warehouse. Rain hammered on the corrugated metal roof. He traced his finger along a tactical map spread across a wooden crate. This city, these streets, if the Japanese hadn't invaded in 1941, this might have been home. He'd considered taking a civilian engineering position here before the war. The Boeing plant in Manila had been offering good money. Now it was all ashes. Pappy? Flint entered, shaking rain from his jacket, now a major. The new parafrag shipment arrived. 10,000 units. Command wants them deployed by Friday. Merrick looked at the crates being unloaded. Thousands of bombs, each one designed with one purpose: to kill. Deploy them, he said quietly. Let's make sure no one else loses a city. Flint studied his friend. You okay? I'm functional.
That's not what I asked. Merrick folded the map. I added 48 names to my list this year. Accidents, malfunctions, combat losses, men testing my designs, men fighting a war, men dying because I built weapons, men living because you built better weapons. The survival rate for low-level bombing is up 60% since WW2. 60%, Pappy. That's hundreds of men going home because of your designs. Merrick didn't answer. He just stared at the rain.
June 1944. Design Evolution. The cluster parafrag was Merrick's attempt at perfection. Instead of one bomb, it dispersed 20 submunitions over a wider area, more coverage, more certainty, less chance of catastrophic failure. The test was successful. Production began immediately. By summer, American bombers were dropping cluster parafrags on Japanese positions across the Pacific. The effectiveness was undeniable, but Merrick couldn't celebrate. Each success meant the war continued. Each innovation meant more death, necessary death perhaps, but death nonetheless. He promoted to lieutenant colonel. He turned down command positions. He didn't want to lead men. He wanted to build tools that would bring men home. Staff Sergeant Garrison, who'd worked with him that long night before WW2, retired as a master sergeant in late 1944. Before he left, he found Merrick in the workshop. "Sir, I wanted to say goodbye." Merrick looked up from his drafting table.
Where are you headed, Fix? Texas. Gonna open a motorcycle shop. Had enough of bombs. Can't blame you for that. Garrison hesitated. Sir, that night before WW2, when we re-inspected all those bombs, you saved my life. Saved a lot of lives. I killed 72 men. You saved 400. Sir, with respect, you need to learn to count the living, not just the dead. Garrison saluted and walked out.
Merrick went back to his designs. August 1945, war's end. When news of Japan's surrender came, Merrick was in his workshop at a forward base in Okinawa. Alone, he set down his tools, walked outside. The base was celebrating. Men were crying, laughing, embracing. Someone had smuggled in champagne. Music played from a radio. Merrick stood apart, watching. The parafrag bomb had helped win this war. His strafer modifications had destroyed thousands of enemy aircraft. His innovations had given America air superiority. But he couldn't celebrate, not when he carried 72 names from WW2, not when he carried 48 more from testing and combat, not when he knew that every bomb he'd designed had killed someone's son, someone's father, someone's brother. Necessary killing, perhaps, but killing nonetheless. Lieutenant Raymond Castellano, Rook, now a captain, found him standing alone. "Pappy, we won! Why aren't you celebrating?" Merrick looked at the young pilot. Rook had survived 49 combat missions against all odds. "I'm glad you're alive, Rook. Because of you, your designs kept me alive. My designs killed 120 men on our side, more on theirs." Rook's smile faded. "Sir, you can't think like that." "Why not? It's true." "Because if you do, you'll go crazy. The war's over, Pappy. We won. That has to mean something." Merrick wanted to believe that. He really did. But when he closed his eyes, all he could see were names. The weight of peace. 1946 to 1986, Merrick returned to civilian life in the spring of 1946. Boeing offered him a senior engineering position, Vice President of Military Aviation Development, a corner office, a six-figure salary, his choice of projects. He turned it down. "I've designed enough weapons," he told them. Douglas Aircraft made an offer. Lockheed tried. Even the newly formed Rand Corporation wanted him for strategic research. He refused them all. Instead, he took a teaching position at MIT, Assistant Professor of Aeronautical Engineering. The pay was terrible. The hours were brutal. The students were demanding. It was perfect. For 40 years, Vincent Merrick taught the next generation of engineers. He was demanding, precise, unforgiving of sloppy work. His students found him terrifying. He failed projects with minor calculation errors. He made them redo entire designs for small miscalculations. He once failed a senior thesis because a single rivet was positioned 3 millimeters off spec. In the real world, he'd say, math mistakes kill people. They thought he was being theoretical. He was remembering 120 names, 1952. The attempt. He tried dating once. Sarah Mitchell, a librarian at the Boston Public Library, quiet, intelligent, kind. They met at a faculty mixer. She laughed at his terrible jokes. She didn't mind that he was 15 years older. She asked him to dinner. On their third date, over Italian food in the North End, she asked about the war. "You were in the Pacific, right? What did you do?" Merrick set down his fork. For a moment, he considered lying, saying he was just a pilot, just another soldier, but he couldn't. "I designed weapons, bombs mostly. I built things that killed people." She waited for him to elaborate. "At a place called Wewak in New Guinea, my bombs killed 107 Japanese servicemen and 72 Americans. The American deaths were my fault. Design defects I should have caught." Her face changed, not disgust exactly, but something close to it. Pity, maybe, or fear. "That must have been difficult," she said carefully. "It was necessary." "But you saved lives too, right? By ending the war faster." "Maybe, probably, I don't know. I can count the dead precisely. The saved are theoretical. The date ended early. She said she had a headache. She never called again." Merrick didn't blame her. Who wants to love a man haunted by ghosts? He didn't date after that. Every August 17th, 1946 to 1987, every year, on August 17th, Merrick disappeared. His colleagues at MIT learned not to ask where he went. His students learned not to schedule appointments that day. The department secretary blocked the date on his calendar in red ink. He drove to Arlington National Cemetery, Section 60, 18 graves. The Wewak dead who'd been recovered and brought home. He visited each one, spoke to each man, told them about his year, what he'd taught, what he'd learned, what he'd failed to forget. He asked for forgiveness. Then he drove home to his small apartment in Cambridge and wrote 72 letters to the families of the Wewak dead, to parents who'd buried sons, to widows who'd raised children alone, to siblings who'd lost brothers. The first few years, most families wrote back, thanking him, assuring him it wasn't his fault, telling him their loved one died doing something meaningful. As the years went by, fewer responded. Parents died, widows remarried, children grew up and moved away. But Merrick kept writing 72 letters every year for 41 years. By 1987, he was writing to grandchildren who'd never met the men who died, to great-nephews who only knew their uncles as names on a memorial wall. But he kept writing because someone needed to remember. 1979, Rook's funeral. When Raymond Castellano's plane crashed during a test flight, Merrick attended the funeral. Rook had become a test pilot after the war, flying experimental aircraft for Lockheed, pushing the boundaries of what was possible. The engine had failed at 12,000 feet. Rook had tried to restart it. By the time he'd given up and reached for the ejection handle, he was too low, impact at 400 miles per hour. At the funeral, Rook's son, a young Air Force lieutenant himself, approached Merrick. "Are you Captain Merrick?" "Yes." "My father talked about you constantly, said you taught him everything that mattered." Merrick's hands shook. He clasped them together to hide it. "I'm sorry. I should have taught him to be more careful. He died doing what he loved. Because you showed him it was possible to love something dangerous and still do it well." The lieutenant saluted and walked away. Merrick stood alone at the graveside long after everyone else had left. That night, he added Rook's name to his list. 121, 1987. The interview request. By 1987, most of the WW2 veterans were dead, heart attacks, cancer, old age. Merrick was one of the last. When Dr. Helen Rodriguez from Georgetown University requested an interview for her oral history project, Merrick's first instinct was to refuse. The war was over, 42 years over. Why revisit it? But then he thought, if I don't tell the story, who will remember the 72? So he agreed, not for glory, for memory. Smithsonian Air and Space Museum. Washington, D.C., June 1987. The interview room was quiet and climate-controlled, a stark contrast to the furnace heat of Port Moresby 44 years earlier. Vincent Merrick sat in a comfortable chair, a glass of water within reach. He was 86 years old now, white hair, liver-spotted hands. The limp was more pronounced. His hearing wasn't what it used to be. But his mind was still sharp. Across from him sat Dr. Rodriguez. She'd been interviewing Pacific War veterans for 5 years, collecting oral histories before the generation died off. A camera on a tripod recorded everything. Colonel Merrick, Dr. Rodriguez began, "Thank you for agreeing to this interview." "Captain," Merrick corrected gently. "I retired as a lieutenant colonel, but I prefer captain. That's the rank I held at WW2. Of course. Captain Merrick, you designed the parafrag bomb. Can you tell me how that came about?" And so Merrick told the story. He told her about Coral Sea, about the 6 men whose names he would never forget. He told her about the physics problem of low-level bombing. He told her about the parachute solution. He told her about the night before the mission, the sabotage, the reinspection. He told her about WW2, the fog, the strafing run, the parachutes that worked and the ones that failed. He told her about watching B-25s explode because his design wasn't perfect. He told her about the crash landing, about waking up to learn that 107 enemy aircraft had been destroyed and 72 Americans had died. When he finished, Dr. Rodriguez consulted her notes. "Captain Merrick, do you regret designing the parafrag bomb?" He looked at her directly. That's the question everyone wants answered, isn't it? A simple yes or no. "What's your answer?" "Both. Neither. I regret that war exists. I don't regret trying to end it faster. I regret 72 American deaths. I don't regret 107 Japanese aircraft that never bombed another American position." He paused. "War doesn't offer clean choices, Dr. Rodriguez. You do the best you can with what you know. You make decisions knowing people will die. Then you live with it."
Ne? How do you live with it? You remember the names, all of them. You carry them. You let them weigh on you, because the moment you stop feeling that weight is the moment you become something else. Dr. Rodriguez made notes, then looked up. "What would you say to young engineers designing weapons today?" Merrick leaned forward. "I'd tell them their designs will kill people. That's the purpose. You're not building tools, you're building instruments of death.
If you can't carry that weight, find another job. That's harsh. War is harsh. The people who enable it should be honest about what they're doing." He paused. "But I'd also say this. If war is inevitable, the most moral thing you can do is end it quickly. A short, brutal war kills fewer people than a long one. Maximum violence, minimum duration. That was the philosophy behind the parafrag." "Did it work?" "We'll never know for certain. But I believe 72 men died so that hundreds of thousands didn't have to. That's the math I use at night." The final years. The interview was published in the Journal of Military History in early 1988. A few historians wrote to Merrick. Some former students reached out, finally understanding why he'd been so demanding. Flint, now 70, called from Florida. "I read your interview, Pappy." "And? You're still carrying them after all these years?" "Of course I am. How could I not? Most men would have moved on. Most men didn't kill them. You didn't kill them. War killed them. I built the weapons. I'm responsible." Flint was quiet for a moment. "Pappy, you're the most brilliant and most tormented man I've ever known. I wish you could forgive yourself." "If I forgive myself, who remembers them? Their families, history. God, if you believe in that." "I don't trust any of those to do the job right." They talked for another hour, about old times, about the men they'd served with, about the world that had emerged from the ashes of the war they'd fought. When they hung up, Merrick went to his desk and wrote 72 letters, the same letters he'd been writing for 42 years. March 12, 1989. Vincent Merrick died on a Sunday morning in a veterans hospital in Virginia. He died alone. By choice. "No visitors," he'd told the nurses weeks earlier. "I said my goodbyes 46 years ago." The nurse who found him noted that he'd died peacefully in his sleep. No pain, no struggle, just a quiet end. On his bedside table they found a folded piece of paper, worn from decades of handling, the creases nearly transparent. It was a list, 121 names, handwritten, each one followed by a rank and a date. The first 6 names were marked Coral Sea, May 1942. 72 names were marked WW2 August 17th, 1943. The rest were scattered across the years. Testing accidents, combat losses, men who'd died flying aircraft or using weapons Vincent Merrick had designed. At the bottom of the list, in fresh ink, was a final note. "I carried you all. I hope it was enough." The funeral. March 18th, 1989. 17 people attended Vincent Merrick's funeral at Arlington National Cemetery. General Sullivan's widow, Dalton Hargrove, using a walker now. A handful of former students, some Air Force historians, a representative from MIT. The Air Force chaplain read the standard eulogy. A hero of the Pacific War, a brilliant engineer, a dedicated teacher. Halfway through, Flint stood up. "Excuse me, Father, but Pappy would hate this." He walked to the podium, pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "Pappy wasn't a hero, not the way we usually mean it. He was an engineer who made terrible decisions for necessary reasons. He carried 121 names every day of his life. He never forgave himself." Mickey Flint's voice cracked. "But he saved thousands, tens of thousands, men who came home from the war because his weapons worked. He just never let himself believe it." He placed the paper on the casket. The list of names, worn from decades of folding and unfolding. "Rest, Pappy. You've carried them long enough." They buried him at Arlington. Section 60, Plot 1847. Next to the 18 WW2 dead who'd been brought home. As they lowered the casket into the earth, a gust of wind picked up, strong enough to rustle the leaves on the oak trees, strong enough to lift a small piece of paper from a nearby wreath, white paper, floating on the wind, tumbling through the air. For just a moment, it looked like a tiny parachute. Then it was gone. The mourners didn't notice. They were watching the casket descend. Only Flint saw it. He smiled through his tears. "Goodbye, old friend," he whispered. Epilogue. The museum? The parafrag bomb remained. In museums, in military history, textbooks, in the tactical doctrine of air forces around the world. The Smithsonian kept one on permanent display. A small placard explained its significance. M23 Parafrag Fragmentation Bomb, 1943 to 1945, designed by Captain Vincent Merrick, USAAF. Over 500,000 produced, credited with destroying thousands of enemy aircraft and contributing significantly to Allied air superiority in the Pacific Theater. Weight, 23 pounds. Visitors walked past it without stopping. A small metal cylinder with a white silk parachute. It didn't look like much. They didn't know it had changed the course of a war. They didn't know it had killed 107 Japanese servicemen at Wewak. They didn't know it had killed 72 Americans when some of the parachutes failed. They didn't know that the man who designed it had carried those names for 46 years. They just saw a toy. But Vincent Merrick had known the truth. Toys are only toys until they kill you. Mockery is only mockery until it becomes a miracle. And innovation always has a cost. The cost of the parafrag bomb was paid by 121 men who died testing or fighting with it, and by one man who designed it and spent the rest of his life trying to make that price mean something. In the end, history remembers the weapon. But Merrick remembered the names, all 121 of them, until the day he died. And perhaps, if Flint's faith meant anything, beyond.